Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, your host for today's episode. I'm so excited to be joined by Dion Dawson, the founder and executive director of Dion's Chicago Dream. Dion, we always like to start with hearing your story, but specifically, we want to start with your Chicago story. So, can you tell us how you came to Chicago? And thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh no, thank you for having me. I am Englewood, born and raised, and that is where I've lived my entire life, except for a couple years when I left for the military. So beyond
Oh,
that,
no.
my story is primarily starting and based around the South Side.
Now, when you say Englewood, people, I'm sure, already get a picture in their mind of what Englewood is like, what they've heard. Probably not a lot of, realistically, not a lot of our listeners have probably been to Englewood. Can you share with us about the Englewood community, about the neighborhood, maybe misconceptions, etc., what you know about the Englewood that you're from?
Oh, I mean, Inglewood is like any other community in Chicago, in the United States. It has some good things, it has some unsavory things, and it has people and residents there who love everything about their neighborhood. And so, Inglewood is no different. Um, Being there my entire life, of course, I come from a family who financially struggled a little bit, and we didn't have all of the opportunities um, that we would have liked, but it was more than enough. I think that when you're talking about those misconceptions, it's not really up. I don't. I it's not really up to me to challenge it. You know what I mean? I think everybody knows their truth. I would just hope that their truth is as informed as it could be. But for me, especially going to the military, traveling around the country and the world, and the state and the city. Chicago and Englewood specifically is no different than any other neighborhood that you could think of.
It's interesting you mentioned that um, you don't, it seems like you don't really want to paint a narrative for people. You kind of want them to devise their own. And realistically, doing that, the best way to do that is to visit, right? Is to see
Yes.
what's there. So I guess for people who want to visit different Chicago neighborhoods and communities, what is it about that neighborhood that you think would really be interesting to people? Maybe like what kind of food, what kind of culture or dynamic is there down in Englewood?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with resiliency. You know what I mean? You're talking about,
Mm,
a neighborhood like other primarily black neighborhoods, black and brown communities that lack a lot of the resources that more
yeah,
affluent communities have. And so it's not that I don't want to paint that narrative, but my goal is not always to bring people from their end of the spectrum all the way to mine. And you can love a country, you can love a city, you can love a state, you can love a neighborhood without visiting it, just by having a interaction and an exchange of a perspective in a healthy way. And so
yeah,
my way of talking about Inglewood and getting people to know some of the good is by just expressing my good things, but not necessarily trying to disprove their misconceptions. But I mean,
yeah.
of course, we have great fast food options. Of course, we have great organizations. We don't have many grocery store options,
Hmm.
but I'm not a glass half empty or a glass half full person. I'm a very big I have a glass person, and so
Wow.
when you're talking about Inglewood, um, you know, knowing the beauty and knowing the resiliency and knowing the strength that I received from it. It is something that goes beyond words sometimes, and it's almost like
Yeah.
when someone would ask you, hey, why do you love your significant other? And you can't really just always say everything in that moment, but you know that the love is there. So that's kind of how I feel about Inglewood.
It's interesting because that's, I think, very much part of the Chicago story. Because we have all these different neighborhoods, people can look at that and see it as very, not necessarily divisive, but certainly people are split up into different neighborhoods, and a lot of people love their neighborhood. They love something about it, and I think historically that has been more divisive and has been more, creating barriers or boundaries. But I think today, thankfully, we have an amazing CTA system,
Yep.
and we have an improving highway system and road
Mhm.
system that allows people to get around, that allows people to go to all these other places. But what I hear most often from people who are from Chicago is like, the Chicago that you know and love is your Chicago, and that's perfectly fine. But opening your horizons or being open to experiencing new things. I haven't been to Englewood, I don't think, but I have been to a lot of different neighborhoods, including Austin. And Austin has some really good food out there if
Yeah.
you can make it out there. Um, and so I know that, like, the Chicago that that each of us individually know, is a true representation of Chicago because it's very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's with I think it's with anything. You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
think that, we all our experiences, shape and mold how we look at something. But I think it's also very important that we don't try to immediately push that on other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
my thing can be my thing. I know that somewhere like Kusanya Cafe, has amazing, oatmeal and
mhm,
amazing French toast. You know what I mean? Things like that.
yeah,
But if somebody else does not like that, that does not invalidate the love and joy that I have for my thing. You know what I mean? And so,
yeah, yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. Chicago is it, of course, it is a divided city. Of course, it is, it has a myriad of people and experiences, but that diversity is something that I would always look at as a strength rather than a weakness.
yeah, absolutely. Um, when did you first realize maybe that your community wasn't receiving all the resources that other communities were, or was at least lacking in some resources in some way?
Well, I think it's weird because when you have a mission or you have a dream that it directly relates to your lived experience, it's it's very, very, it's intricate at how you
Mhm.
perceive it. So when you say, when did I realize my neighborhood wasn't receiving something, it wasn't until well after I started my organization, because I didn't look at it like that. I didn't look at
Wow.
it from uh we're not receiving this thing. I looked at it from I need to provide this thing. And so,
Okay.
it's more about, having an active role in what's going on and not a passive one. And so when you say it
Yeah.
like that, I would say in the last year, even though our org is going on 3 years old, I would say in the
Wow.
last year, I've settled on that framing. But initially, it was just, around that joy and love and saying, hey, I want to bring this, not, hey, why don't we have this? Because
Yeah.
going through everything that I've went through in my life, from homelessness to food insecurity, um, to mental health issues, to being a disabled veteran, um, it you have these moments where right before I started the org, I just realized that, okay, so what? Now what? Okay,
Yeah.
this is true. What do I do now? You know what I mean? And I think that when you
Yeah.
framed it
Yeah.
like that, this last year, I think I'm lucky that I didn't think like that in the beginning, because I think that that's too close to my trauma for me to really
Yeah.
operate proactively and
Yeah.
not reactively.
It's a great point. I mean, entrepreneurship is really just finding a need and creating something to meet that need, whether it's an invention
Yes.
that you make, or we've heard with a lot of these nonprofits, there was a need there, and they built this organization to create that need. And that sounds like exactly what you did there. Not worrying about are the resources available outside of me to be able to create it, but like if there's a need, can I fill that? And is that something that I'm willing to do? Is more what you're thinking about in that situation.
Yes, yes, because I think that just like you said it, it's okay to be motivated by your story. It's okay for it to tie in. But the thing about social entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship in general is that it can't only be about you. It has to be at some point,
Yeah,
it has to transition from being about you and your story to being about your program or product. And once you can find that bridge and start crossing it, it becomes easier because it's not just all working off of that lived experience. And so I think that you brought
yeah,
up a great point in that it has to be about that product. It has to be just for longevity purposes.
yeah, yeah. And I think there are certainly those basic business concepts that absolutely apply no matter what you're doing, including starting a nonprofit.
Definitely, definitely.
Um,
One of my mentors. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Go ahead.
no, no, go right ahead, please.
Oh yeah, one of my mentors, Dory McWhorter, who's over YMCA Chicago. One of her famous quotes is, nonprofit is just a tax status, and so you have to look at how you're running your nonprofit because it still is a business. You know what I mean? I think that
Yeah,
in learning from her, I learned that when creating that product and that programming, which for us is dream deliveries, it allowed me to really hone in. Okay, like I told you earlier, now what? You know what I mean? We
yeah,
have the problem, you know what I mean? But in terms of your program or product, now what? How do you
yeah,
go to fill that gap? How do you go to solve that problem? How do you go to meet that need?
yeah, yeah. So good. Um, we want to thank you for your service. We're very grateful for all veterans. But can you tell us what fueled your decision to go to the military, and then what you brought out of that, what you've learned from that you apply to your life now?
Well, I think that, I don't really know, why I really went to the Navy. I'll be honest with you, just coming from not having many options, even having a high ACT score, but not really knowing what to do with it, and
Mm,
having no type of financial backing at home, even if I did, go out of state to college or things like that. So college just never seemed like a legitimate option for me. And I just always, in the last few years before the military, as a teenager, you really start feeling that survival mode, and so I just felt like I had to just try to continue to figure this thing out, and I wanted to
yeah,
do it independently of influence because I know what it felt like to not have, but I never felt what it felt like to go get it, and so coming out of the Navy, I would say I had a real appreciation for what you really could, do in a day. I went from not working out and not really, liking being in shape to when I was deployed, some days I were doing 3 workouts a day, morning, lunch, and nighttime. You know what I mean? And so you start learning what you could really pull off in a 24-hour span. And it allowed me to understand that a lot of external things don't really matter when it came to my universe. And so I think that has been something that has really helped me not only go down this path, but really create a living, breathing company that not only provides value but has employed people and really been chipping away at and changing how we look at a major societal issue.
yeah. And I'm sure that the leadership that the military provides certainly helps that with that too.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Nah. Nah, I wouldn't. Because I've had better. Of course, I interacted with some amazing leaders. One or two are still with me today, but no, I've encountered many more leaders in Englewood. You know what I mean? I think
Mm.
there's this common misconception that this one I will fight is that I have to go outside of Englewood to find leaders that I can respect and learn from. And so, I try to make that a mission of mine, even today as a leader of Englewood, to highlight other leaders in Englewood. Our children, our residents, they don't have to go far to find amazing leaders that really, lead with love and true intention and care. So, yeah, no, the military, and all of the things that it did do for me, I would say that I found better, a nice consensus of leaders in Englewood.
Yeah, and I think that's so good because I just wonder if a lot of times we're just not looking for what we need from the community that we are a part of, but we look outside of that and think, okay, I have to go over there to get it over there. But you mentioned that, and I think, well, that has to exist in a lot of these communities, and if not
Oh,
all
of
of these
course.
communities have to have amazing leaders, amazing resources, libraries, all these things that we have that, let's be honest, they're not all going to be the best, and not every community is going to have what the other one has, but you have something, right?
No, of course. And I think that when you're looking at it, it's about learning how to activate those different things. You know what I mean? What's at
Hmm.
my disposal, and how do I activate them in a way that benefits me, which can then ultimately benefit my organization, which then ultimately will benefit the community. It has that
Yeah.
domino effect.
And I think that's building on a concept that we've heard from a lot of nonprofit leaders is that, um, when it comes to resources, there's having access to resources, there's knowing that those resources are there. And then, as you pointed out, there's activating those resources to be able to use them to do what you are capable of, to do what you have the potential of. And I think all of those concepts kind of build on each other to end up with people like you who are going out there and creating something to help in their own communities with a need that exists.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, I look at it as, what we've seen in this pandemic and the last few years is we've seen a major reset in what we think we need to get something done. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
And granted, there was a market downturn in on this side, but there was a market uptick in other areas. You know what I mean? I think that it
Yeah.
comes in ebbs and flows, and as leaders and as a society, um, I've just learned that there's certain things you just have to kind of lean into at certain moments.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we need to give special recognition to all the people who started a business or a nonprofit, some sort of company during the pandemic times, because I think
Oh
in a
yeah,
time where we're all trying to figure out what life is going to be like, or like how we're
yeah,
going to do this thing, the fact
yeah,
that there are people going out there and starting stuff like this, it's like, wow. I mean, these
yeah.
people, it's just amazing to think that the courage that it takes to do that in general, and then you multiply that in a world that none of us really, even still to this day, like we don't know what tomorrow's going to look like. It feels has to be like even tougher.
But you know what? I think the good thing that is that I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, and that mystery is the sweet spot. Is that we don't know, and so it motivates me to take advantage of what's in front of me because
Hmm.
we've been shown continuously we don't know what tomorrow would bring. And so you're absolutely right. That it may be difficult for people who was in it before to then see how everything transitioned. But for me, I just I'm thankfully I was in it. We're in a pandemic, um, And not only were we able to start here, we were able to then, kind of transition and keep learning and growing, uh,
Yeah.
as time kind of went on.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about Dion's Chicago Dream because we would definitely want to learn about what that is and how that started. So, what is this something you thought of for a long time and then kind of said, okay, here's what it's going to look like? Or how did this get started? How did Dion's Chicago Dream come to be?
Well, I mean, it came from, of course, I've always wanted to help my community. That's part of the reason I came back to Chicago after the Navy. But I wouldn't say that it was, excuse me, it wasn't in the way, by way of nonprofit. That was never like a dreams or anything like that. But it started, um, after the pandemic was in, kind of full swing, and before, um, Juneteenth of 2020, somebody came to me, one of my good friends and like, little brother. He said, "What are you doing for Juneteenth?" And I said, and I kind of said, "Well, I'll do whatever I can." And he was like, "No, what are you doing?" And he was looking for this pinpoint thing. He wanted me to
Hmm.
commit to, and I said without thinking, "We're gonna feed 100 families." Had no idea, never did my own food operations, didn't have any money, but I said it, and he said, "Okay." And so, uh, on Juneteenth, we started a GoFundMe, and in 24 hours later, 25 hours, we raised $2,500. And on July 3rd
Oh,
of 2020, we fed 90 between 92 and 96 households with over 800 pounds of food, and it was
wow.
the greatest day of my life. And that started the love affair of just, kind of, mobilizing and actualizing how, things could be done with my own hands and not me waiting. And so, ended up becoming a nonprofit in a couple months, and then from there, what started with the community fridge, has grown into an organization, where we provide a week's worth of fresh produce being delivered, to households all over the city of Chicago. Right now, we're in 25 Chicagoland neighborhoods, and we were providing 21,000 pounds of food per month, to about 3,200 residents per week. And so, but that's just what Dion Chicago Dream is. It's just looking at, how we look at stabilizing critical needs to then deploy social services. At the heart of what we're doing, we're a logistics organization where
Yeah.
we've been able to do all of this without any volunteerism. You know what I mean? We've
Wow.
created 12 jobs, all paying over $20 an hour. Because what I've seen, is that, we want to feed people, but you can't depend on volunteerism to stabilize your workforce. And so,
Yeah.
um, we've been able to own buy all of our food, no donated food, buy our food, pay our people, own our assets. And so we're kind of in a league of our own, because we built this, with the people and not on the backs of people.
Yeah. Are you, logistically speaking, are you taking what's there and sort of realigning it to direct it to communities in need, or are you creating new logistical systems to kind of move the food into the communities?
Oh no, we've created new logistical systems. So we use our own, route running software. We use SMS text notifications. All of our data is in house, and we own all of our delivery sprinters. And we buy our food, pack our food in our branded boxes, and we deliver them. That's the thing, there's no delivery mechanism right now besides what we're doing. That's why when you're
Yeah.
riding past these communities, people are feeding people outside. And so, because I came
Yeah.
from that, I know what that feels like. And that's the worst
Yeah.
feeling in the world. Waiting
Yeah.
hours in line to get something that you don't know if the quality will be premium. To wait in a line and get, a box of things that you wouldn't ever buy. So we talk about these logistical systems, they weren't in place. You know what I mean? I think, like that is, thanks directly to, my team of people, who've been with me every step of the way, who we pay every single week, who work there off to make sure that these households all over the city are food secure, because when you're
Yeah.
enrolled in dream deliveries, you go from food insecure to food secure.
Yeah. Yeah. On that subject of food security, can you share with us, because people may not understand that there's a difference between having access to food. You mentioned, Inglewood, just like everywhere else, you have fast food restaurants. What's the difference, though, between having access to some food and a food desert, which certainly there are communities in Chicago that are more food deserts?
Oh no, I mean, but what you don't want to do is jump past the most basic comparison, which is hunger and food insecurity, because that is
Hmm.
where we have the misconception. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Of course, we know that there's a food desert, an area which lacks, a healthy model or a grocery store option. But we're talking about hunger and food insecurity is completely different. And so now when you look at hunger being a feeling, you're feeling the feeling of hunger versus food insecurity, which is the lack of consistent access to healthy options.
Mm.
You'll start to be able to be discerning in the response to each one. Since they're not the same, you can fight hunger with place and event based feeding, because you can
Okay.
solve hunger like that. You cannot solve food insecurity by feeding somebody one time. And so
Yeah.
now when you look at it, if you see someone saying they're fighting food insecurity, but they did nothing to talk about the quality or the access, then by the definition, they did not fight food insecurity. And so it's about holding all of our organizations and all of those major players accountable to do what they say they're doing. What we
Yeah.
want to do is right the ship to show that it's different, because that is where the true difference is. If you look at the proposed product or program, is it solving food insecurity or is it solving hunger? For our
Yeah.
Project Dream Fridge, which is the one community fridge we have, that's solving hunger. But
Okay.
what does it say about food insecurity? Not a lot. Dream
Yeah. Yeah.
delivery is solving hunger and food insecurity, because we have the consistency, we have the access, we have the quality. And so I think that's the big difference. And that's the thing that I would like to highlight.
Yeah, and with food insecurity, and part of solving that, I assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's important that people are able to consistently make food in their homes that they would typically eat if they could just go to the grocery store and buy that same food.
Yes. And even if it's something that they would not buy, having access to high quality options, period.
Okay.
You know what I mean? That's the thing. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't you can't dictate choice, but you can make sure that of those choices, the quality is high. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
someone is not less than because they pick this over that. And so
Yeah.
it's just about putting that power back with the people and making sure that it truly is equitable.
Yeah. And I think that it's helpful because then you look at it and you say, okay, there are organizations that are dedicated to solving hunger. There are organizations that are dedicated to solving food insecurity. And there are some organizations, I think, that try and do some of both, or at least educate people in those areas. As far as Beyond Chicago Dream and this part of, because I understand this is only just a part of what you hope to do. So this
Yes.
part of Beyond Chicago Dream that is active right now, and you look at it and you say, okay, with all these things out there, what can you realistically do, or what do you realistically hope to do in order to maybe look at those three assets or facets of, solving hunger, solving food insecurity, and educating people about the need?
Well, no, see, it's funny because I don't really touch on educating people like that,
Okay.
because I think that when we talk about communities of color, people immediately say, "Oh, well, how are you teaching them?" You know what I mean? How are you either teaching them about the need or teaching them about eating healthy? You know what I mean? And I think that's extremely toxic and dangerous because, as far as if you look in history, black and brown people never needed to be educated
So
about how to eat food. And so I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that, for us at our core, we don't educate anybody because we don't assume people need educating. People know that there's a problem, and people know what to do when they're given a fair shot. Is when you
yeah,
don't give people a fair shot, or when you don't respect their intellect and what they know to be true about their systems. Then that's where it gets a little wonky. And so for me, I have to make sure that as an organization and as a leader, what we're building is better than what's here. And when we're talking about this education thing, that's something that really kind of grinds my gears when I hear people talk about my people and they say, "Well, what are you doing to educate them? Who told you they weren't educated? Where did
yeah,
that come? How did that get introduced? Even about the problem." You know what I mean? For
right,
me to come from a neighborhood or to have an upbringing that was extremely tumultuous, why do I need to be reminded or told about what the problem is? I know more of the problem than you do. When I get on calls and I have meetings, people try to tell me how to solve a problem they didn't solve and they've never solved. And so
yeah,
it's also standing in my power as a leader, as a black man, and as a social entrepreneur, where I don't need validation from external forces that is not doing what I'm doing.
yeah. Just to clarify, because I think that's really good, and I think I'm glad that you said that. More what I was thinking is the way of educating people who are not, don't have that experience, who have been privileged enough to be never having to worry about hunger or where their next meal is going to come from or how people get food. As far as educating those people about what this looks like, or what people are experiencing in other places, organizations that do that kind of work is more what I was thinking. But I think
Oh
what you
no, no,
said is really
yeah,
helpful.
yeah, no, I understand. I understand, but again, that goes back to me, changing misconceptions right now. So, for
Yeah.
example, when you look at the market cap of food distribution in Chicago, it's in the hundreds of millions.
Mm.
You can be a successful organization and not teach anybody about what that lived experience looks like. And that's why if you look at
Yeah.
how we market our organization, it's about the product and about the success of the program, not about people's lived experience, because they're the only ones that have the right to share what that lived experience is. If you look at our social media, if you look at how we talk about this, we don't make it about other people's lived experience because we're not going to participate in poverty porn. It's not up for me to justify this amazing program and product by saying, well, Miss Sally is starving and that's why you should care. No, you
Yeah.
you don't you don't have to care because I can't make you care. But this is a business that is has a market cap of hundreds of millions, and the only thing I'm doing is bringing quality and equity back to that. I
Yeah.
can't make anybody care. And I'm not going to use talking points or education to get that across because there's no guarantee that it will land on the ears that it needs to land on. So instead,
Yeah.
we know that there is corporate kickbacks involved and tax breaks involved when donating. We know that in terms of social impact, every major corporation and company has a division for that. That is what we're talking to. We want the people who are investing to invest smartly. We want the people who are donating to know what's really going on. But as far as just talking about educating people on that lived experience, we don't dictate whose lived experience we get to share. And that's why you
Yeah.
never hear us talk about
Which is, I think, different than what we've seen in the past, where we'll take, for example, because it's the one that's coming to my mind, when like the ASPCA, or these animal protection
Yes.
nonprofits when they get on TV and you see all the animals that are being hurt and the sad eyes and the cry. It's like in the past, it seems like most organizations have said, okay, let us put this in front of you because otherwise you're not going to see it, and show you this cat who's being abused so that you give to my organization so that people can go out there and bring that cat to a safe space and hopefully have the cat get adopted into a family. But what you're sharing is that that's really not what you're trying to do, and that's not what's important. What's important is not getting those people and putting them in your face and saying, see, this person needs help. Is just saying there are people who need some resources here and we're here to help provide those. Do you want to be a part of that or not?
And I mean, here's the thing. I think it's extremely telling um, that you use like animal cruelty society type example for human trauma. Number one. Number two is if you look at how it's marketed, which and of course I know that's what you were speaking to, but if you look at how it's marketed, that that in and of itself is also telling because, for example, when I talked about place-based feeding, right? And I'm sure you have driven past a food giveaway or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that that the way that is normalized of feeding people looks eerily similar to hurricane response and when they feed people who are displaced? So what I'm saying, and and the correlation there is telling that the way that we feed people who are place based is equivalent to hurricanes, and what you've just equated, which is like like marketing of a humane society to feeding people. You know what I mean? Let alone in communities like Englewood that people have never been to. So now we have programs that are not only created but marketed to people that people have never seen. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right.
we're just finding more and more gaps in a system that markets itself as if it has it figured out. And so for me and my organization, the only thing I noticed was that after a certain point, there was no man trying to keep me down. There was no higher power trying to keep us out the room. When we got through the door and got to the other side, it was just people wandering around aimlessly. And I realized
Mm-hmm.
that there was no intention in the movement. And so now when we're talking about feeding people, it is just simply we're extremely intentional about what we do, what we provide, and what we say. And that alone allows us to operate in the room and in the market in a totally different way because we
Yeah.
couldn't possibly do it without those people anyway. Without our residents, there is no team. Without no team, there is no me. And so it all works in harmony. And so, it's just really looking at the resident and looking at this need as an opportunity to provide value and equity and equality. And that's just not the case right now. That's not the market standard like you were speaking to.
Do you ever get pushback on that from organizations that you talk to about how you do that, or about wanting to maybe change that narrative a little bit? Do you get pushback from other people who say that's not the way things are done, or that's not the way we want to do them?
I mean, initially, and then I never talked to them again. I mean,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean? So, I mean, of course, there is room for growth and there's room for understanding. Um, but don't get it twisted. And what we're doing, Dion Chicago Dream is like we're at the beach, and you have the surfers, you have the sun tanners, you know what I mean? You have the people who came to get wet. You have other people who are eating ice cream. And what we're doing is we're all the way at the other end of the beach and we're building a sandcastle. But when you're
Mm.
building a sandcastle, you grow up and you learn that sandcastles aren't built for you. They're built to show other people what is possible. And so
Yeah.
when we're talking about, that pushback, that's fine. as long as it's not a distraction, as long as it's
Yeah. Yeah.
constructive, as long as it's
Right.
anchored in the people. And what I found is that if you get to the root of the pushback, it's not anchored in the resident experience. It's
Hmm.
anchored in the donor experience. And
Hmm.
we will not champion ever the donor experience over the recipient experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. I think that's really. I mean, I'm really encouraged by what you've been sharing because I think that there are some people who come on and they're very open and they're very honest, and I think that you hear what they say and you say they're passionate about it. They want to do it. They want to make a change, but maybe they have some script they have to follow there, or they've been told you can say this or you can't say that. And I think that it is what it is. Some organizations they just have things behind them that are telling them, they have people, they have other organizations that are kind of saying, be careful about what you say because we don't want this to be perceived as being too aggressive or too, um, asking for too much or doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. But but I'm really encouraged by what you're saying because I think it's just the truth. I think it's just
Well,
what
well, I
what
mean,
you've
I'll tell you
experienced, and it's
this. I'll tell you this. I'm a 12-year communications and public relations professional. I could come on your platform. I could, be welcomed on your platform and BS you, but I think that that's not fair. You know what I mean? And I
yeah,
think that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
what we've been able to do is that we have to start righting the wrongs, and we have to start leveling the playing field. And we have to make
Mhm.
sure that as long as it's anchored in the people and as long as we're really doing what we say we're doing, I shouldn't have to come and get briefed about what I can and can't say. I shouldn't be worried about what we talk about. And I think that,
Yeah,
for you all in your platform and just journalism in general, because I'm a journalist at heart, right is right and wrong is wrong. And it's not complicated. And what we're doing is not complicated. We're
yeah,
feeding people food that we buy. The people who are on our team are compensated, and we own all of our assets. And so in doing that, we have buying power, we have staying power, but also we've done it in front of everybody so that they can see that at the end of the day, this is not only possible, but this can really get to the root and start to evolve how we approach all of these problems. But I truly don't even give a damn about those people who's faking it, because at the end of the day, you're gonna have to keep faking it. I just
yeah.
rather have honest dialogue with you and really talk about why we're doing it, because the people deserve that. I think we're in a time on the I would say the back end of a pandemic and in the middle of economic downturn, where if we weren't for real, we wouldn't have made it this far. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and I can totally credit that to two things wholeheartedly. That is the people that we're serving and the team that I have with me. That is it. If I did not have them and if we did not have the residents, then none of this would be possible. And so, because of it, we owe it to our residents all throughout Chicago to make sure that however we feel like the future of this problem is, we're giving, we're doing our best at solving it, and we're treating them with as much equity and equality as we possibly could. Because no, there's no big I's and small U's. You know what I mean? And I'm not a college graduate, and I don't look for external validation when factually we're doing something that is truly historic here. And I'd be remiss if, I didn't stand in that power that my team has, been a major part in building. So, to each his own. But for, bridging Chicago and Dion Chicago dream is going to be, an honest conversation.
And I think what you shared is also making it your organization really sustainable. It means that it can be a thing, but also it's something that can last for a long time because it is the truth, because it is the reality of what people are living and what you want to do.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And I think that, it I tell whenever I talk to people and they realize what we've been able to do, they say, so that's it. And I say, well, yeah, it's not complicated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that, when you truly, how do I say this? I think that it is extremely important that, we're as good of a people as we can be. And
Hmm.
as a leader, as somebody who worked in PR and, wrote statements and quotes and speeches for four-star admirals and worked at the president's hospital, a lot of these leaders aren't who they say they are. And so now I don't have to, I just hope every day that as an org and as a leader, we're doing our best by the people.
Yeah.
And as long as we do that, every single day we could wake up and the appreciation of having the glass will always be there. Only when we
Yeah.
change our true north from the people to something else, then we're questioning if the juice is worth the squeeze or not.
Mm. Yeah, well, you've definitely given us a lot to think about and maybe reframe what we thought we already knew. So we certainly appreciate that. We always want to make sure that people can connect with you if they want to, if they felt some sort of connection or want to learn more. And so just share with us if people want to come around you, want to be a part of this, what is the best way for them to do that? What is the best thing that people can do to support Dion's Chicago Dream?
Oh yeah, of course. They can always find us at www.dionschicagodream.com. That's DIONS chicagodream.com. We're on every platform. So, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and LinkedIn, at Dion's Chicago Dream. And they can, if there's a food insecure household in the Chicagoland neighborhood, they can call us at 312-509-4909 to be added to our wait list. And I mean, that's it. I'm one of the easiest guys in Chicago to find. And I pride myself on that accessibility. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we want to thank you for tuning into this episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. You can you can re-listen to this episode or listen to our past episodes at www.bridgingchicago.com. And of course, on all podcast platforms. Make sure you visit www.dionschicagodream.com to learn more about them. That's DIONS chicagodream.com. And we look forward to hearing from you on another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. Thanks so much, Dion.
all right, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.